Joel, Habakkuk, and Obadiah we will get to in a second after review Micah, Nahum, and Zephaniah. The story of Micah. Now, this was the very beginning sentence we had about Micah. Can you finish it? Right? Why is it that Micah presents why the world secretly dreams about the leadership that only Jesus can give? Remember what that story was all about? It was about this idea that even the statue in front of the UN building represents a longing for conditions that only Messiah can bring. Remember what that statue was? Beating the swords into plowshares. Very popular idea. We saw it in Michael Jackson's song and Les Mis songs, and everybody wants that, but nobody wants Jesus, right? We're all about the Babel. We're all about trying to achieve the goals of God, but leave God out. That's the messy part. We don't want to do that, right? But again, you unless Jesus makes this happen, it ain't going to happen. Right? What it means to trust God when other people treat you badly from Nahum was this: when I want good for those who hurt me, I'm overcoming evil with good. God says, vengeance is mine. That's His job. When you can just leave that with Him and trust Him to do it and do good to those who hurt you, Romans chapter 12, we've let God do His job so we can then do ours. Right? And then finally, why also is such a wicked word from Zephaniah? Because syncretism is the error of mixing truth and error. Well, the worst part of that last sentence is the and, worshiping Yahweh and Molech. Sugarcoating worldly values with a Christian coating. Right? Stuff we want to avoid. So that's where we have been. Here's where we're going to go with Joel, Habakkuk, and Obadiah. Joel is going to show us another example of how God is this relentless pursuer. And remember, the very first time that whole idea came up was in the curses of Deuteronomy. And the reason why there are 3 or 4 times as many curses as there are blessings is not because God enjoys hurting people, but because God doesn't stop coming after us as we turn from Him. We'll see it again in Joel. Then Habakkuk. Habakkuk is one of my favorite books just because it's so different. All these books are really different. This is not a typical prophet getting up to preach. This is like listening in on a private conversation with God. This is more like reading Habakkuk's diary than it is listening to a sermon. So you get to see the inner workings and questions that go on between Habakkuk and God. It's fascinating stuff. And then finally, we're only going to look at the first chapter of Obadiah. We just don't have time to look at more of it than that. Okay. Checking to see if you guys had read Obadiah. Because if you haven't, you're going to almost read the whole book on the screen this morning, right? Just one chapter. Why Obadiah delivered such a timely message. And what's unique about Obadiah is not what you're going to learn. In fact, you in some ways won't learn anything. You've seen the message before, but what makes this thing really work is the timing, and I'll explain that to you when we get there. So let's get back with Joel, and let's talk about our historical background, where we fit. And we've taken a look at Isaiah, Micah, Nahum, and Zephaniah fitting right about in there. Joel's going to fit here right about 630 BC, right? About 45 years before 586 happens. It's a really critical time. Habakkuk, again, this impending doom is on the way. You can feel it, you can sense it, you can taste it. And Habakkuk is going to talk to us about how you deal with that. And then Obadiah actually happens here in 586 because the destruction of Jerusalem, the siege has happened, and now we've got one of the very first messages for how to deal with what happened there in 586 through the very short but important prophecy of Obadiah. So, historical background for Joel is this. I think I put this picture in your notes, didn't I? You have this picture in your notes? What I'm going to show you is the devastation of a locust plague, because I'm pretty sure, I doubt, any of us have been through this. Sometimes you'll hear locusts in the summertime, and you can hear them, and they're maybe a slight bit annoying, but that's as much damage as they cause. But in ancient Israel and in places in the Middle East today, this is a picture of an olive tree, which is a really, really important tree. It's not just where you get hors d'oeuvres from, or olives, or appetizers, right? The olive tree is really, really important because not only do you get the olives, which you can eat, of course, but the oil, which is really more important, you use for cooking and even for lighting your house, right? So if you don't have olives, there's a major part of the economy and the household economy that's gone. And here's a picture, no kidding around, of an olive tree and a guy there, and 15 minutes later, what it looks like after a locust plague has come through. So to us, it looks like, okay, there's summer on the left and winter on the right, and the answer is no, that's 15 minutes. That's what a locust plague can do. And it's not just the leaves are gone, but the olives are gone, and these are really, I mean, these are nasty locusts, right? Because even the guy and his little dog are gone too, right? And this is bad stuff. Okay, maybe they didn't eat the guy, but this is really bad stuff because, we can kind of joke about it and make it lighthearted, but when you put yourself back in these days, this is a really devastating thing because you don't just go down to the grocery store and get canned goods. Right? So this is like, I mean, what this means is that it's going to be really, really hard to find anything to eat for the next 6 months or a year. This means that old people are going to die. This means that little people, infants, are not going to survive. This is like saying something like, hurricane to you and me doesn't mean much, but if you lived in New Orleans, hurricane, the sound of that sounds really bad, right? Or if you live in, Southern California and you say earthquake, that is a devastating thing. To say locust plague to these people really gets their attention, and that indeed is the point of the whole thing, because Joel comes along and Joel says, let me explain to you what's going on here. Because when those people look at this, they look and think, oh man, that was a really bad accident. That was a bad freak accident of nature. What caused this? And Joel shows up on the scene to say, no. Let me interpret for you what just happened. And of course, he opens up his Bible to the book of Deuteronomy. In case you hadn't seen it before, you know that's the answer, right? Every good prophet opens up Deuteronomy. And he says things like this: it shall come to pass if you don't obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe carefully all his commandments, his statutes, which I command you today, that all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. Now you know where he's going next, right? Where's he going to go? Well, he's going to go right here. Locusts shall consume all your trees and the produce of your land. And this is basically what Joel chapter 1 is. It's just a sermon based on Deuteronomy to their current situation, interpreting the event of the locust plague. This is not a piece of bad luck. This is a judgment from God because you've turned away from him. And then, as the prophets always do, remember this is the whole point of the curses of Deuteronomy, to say, if you repent, if you with all of your hearts turn back to God, he will restore what he has taken from you and bring you back. Because he never really wanted to hurt you. He's just trying to wake you up to get you back to him. But if you don't, if you persist in sin, then here's what's coming next. And he probably just reads down, right, through Deuteronomy from verses 42 to 49. The Lord will bring a nation against you from afar, from the end of the earth, as swift as eagle flies, a nation whose language you will not understand. And this is basically Joel chapter 2. Right? Now, if you read through Joel chapter 2, he's really talking about Babylonians. And you may not quite pick that up because he's being very cute about it. He's being very literarily consistent, and there's a coherence here. There's a strategy because he's trying to connect it with the judgment of the locust plague. So he's saying, okay, in chapter 1, you had these bugs come. You think these bugs in chapter 1 were bad. There are some really big bugs coming in chapter 2. And these are big bugs that are coming, and they're going to devour the land. But he's really talking about Babylonian soldiers who are going to eat up everything and even more, right? Even the guy and his little dog now with the Babylonians, okay? So that's what he's warning them about, again, in order to get them to repent so that God doesn't have to do this. That's what all the purpose of the prophets are here. So I want to introduce you then to this phrase that you're going to see in the rest of the prophets and in the New Testament writings as well. And Joel is the one who kind of introduces it for us, and it is the day of the Lord. You guys ever heard of the day of the Lord? And all you have to, you just read New Testament too. You can find it in Thessalonians and Revelation and other places, the day of the Lord. And Joel starts it here, and what he means by it is this: it's a day or time when God intervenes in history. Now, don't misunderstand. The doctrine of God's providence and sovereignty means that everything is within his purview and in his control all the time. He's always working behind the scenes. But there are times when he breaks in a more visible way. And that's what we're talking about here. It's a day or time when God intervenes in history in a real obvious way, in a decisive way, to judge or deliver his people. So is the day of the Lord good or bad? Well, it depends. If Israel is good, he could be breaking in to rescue them. If Israel has turned away from him, he could be breaking in to judge them. Okay, but it's a time when God, colloquially we might say when God shows up. I mean, God really showed up. It was a God thing. It was a God moment. It was one of those things that was obvious. Right? In one sense, every moment's a God moment. We just don't see it all. Right? But these, you see. So, in this book, there are at least 3 different days of the Lord. And in chapter 1, there was a locust plague, which was past. That was a day of the Lord. Right? Not a big one compared to the next one, but the next one, the 586 BC destruction, spoken of in chapter 2, from his perspective, from their perspective, was still future. So he's saying, okay, you just had a day of the Lord. Do you want another one? You don't, do you? No, we don't want another one. Okay, then change your attitude and repent, right? Or this is going to happen. And of course, you know how the story went. They didn't, and so that happened. And so, again, in perfect, relentless pursuer mode, Joel comes along and says, and if you don't change from this, there's still another one coming. And so, best I can describe it, he talks about end times, when the sun's going to fall, when the stars are going to fall from the sky, and the moon's going to turn to blood, and all sorts of stuff. And I'll just basically kind of describe it as tribulation, when the skies are going to break loose, and the ultimate time of God breaking in, the ultimate day of the Lord, is going to show up, when God is going to judge the world and indeed deliver his people Israel, I believe. And this relates perfectly, in my opinion, to the book of Revelation, and some of the prophecies of Paul, and even Jesus in Matthew 24 and 25. So let me just kind of summarize it like this then, and we'll go with our little mountain peaks idea that we've seen in the prophets, right? Those things that are so similar that you see one, you see the other one, one's bigger than the other. So in chapter 1, we've got real, literal, actual bugs. Sorry for the cheesy clip art here. Real bugs. Chapter 2, we got Babylonian soldiers, real people. Just trying to make sure you see the difference, because when you read chapter 2, you think he's talking about big bugs, but he's talking about Babylonian bugs. Okay? And then we got 2 B's going, so we need another B for 3. So let's put boom. Okay? So ultimate end time kind of stuff, all from the relentless pursuer. All right? You good? Questions about this book, about Joel? All right. Anybody here ever been through a locust plague or seen the devastation of locusts? You lived in the Middle East or Africa or somewhere? Anybody been through a bad hurricane? Anybody been through a bad earthquake? Y'all are sheltered, man. What have you been through? A big earthquake? Where were you? Oh, wow. Did you survive or did you die? Survive, okay, good. I hope you had insurance, you know. Okay, good. That's funny. All right, let's go on now. Let's take a look at Habakkuk. And again, this is the prophet's private conversation with God. Let me darken things up here so you can see what you're actually looking at. I don't know if you can see it or not. Obviously, this is the side of a dam, but there's stuff on it. Can you see the stuff that's on it? I mean, it's hard to see, but all these little dots are not like moss grown out. Can you see this little dot down here? It's not a person. This is a goat. I mean, these are all little goats out here. All this stuff, these are goats. And I don't even know what they're looking for, but it's just an amazing picture to me. And I don't want to show it to you because here's another. This is actually in Israel. This is an ibex. You're looking out over the Dead Sea, and that picture does not do it justice because the ground is not right below him. The ground is 1,000 feet below him. And you look at that little guy, and it just makes me almost faint just to look at him. I'm thinking, what are you doing? But this is what they do all the time, right? And one of my favorite pictures is this guy. It's like, why? Number one, how are you going to get out of there? And how did you get there? But this is just, we would look at this almost like supernatural, but that's because God has fitted them with the feet to do this kind of stuff, right? This is how they survive. Nobody else can do this. No other predators can get up there and follow them. So, it's a safe place for them because of the sure-footedness of their feet. So the reason I bring it up is because this is where Habakkuk actually ends with this illustration. You need to see it first before to feel the power of it when we get there. So let me give you the story of Habakkuk, and it's basically this. Basically, it's just three questions. Three questions that Habakkuk has for God, and then God answers them in some way. And his first question is this. He says, God, why do you allow such sin to continue among your people? So he's looking out at the people of Israel. He's seen that they're in chaos. They have turned away from God. They are ripe for judgment, and it grieves his soul. Right? And so he says, God, I can't do anything with them. Would you please do? Don't you see what's going on here? Why do you let this stuff continue? This is obviously so wrong. God, stop this. Right? That's kind of his prayer, his sense. And he says it like this. He says, how long, O Lord, must I call for help? But you don't listen. I cry out to you, violence, right? There's violence going on among your people. They're treating each other badly. But you don't say, why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Like, so God, just do something about this. That's his attitude, right? And so God's answer, he comes along and he says, I won't. That is, why do you let this continue? And God says, I won't let it continue, right? And at this point, Habakkuk's thinking, well, that's good. Answer to prayer. Thank you very much. I'm glad you finally noticed. I'm glad I brought this up to you. Obviously, you weren't paying attention or something, and now you will. God says, you're right. It's a good point. I won't let this continue. I will destroy Judah. Wait, time out. That's not what I was looking for. But look at what he says. Look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed. For I'm going to do something in your days that you would not believe even if you were told. I'm raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people, who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwelling places not their own. Now, as we read this with hindsight, we think, why is that so hard to imagine? Of course you're going to raise up the Babylonians. We know history. But what you have to realize is that in his day, the map looked like this. Right? Assyria was the big gorilla in 630 BC. Babylon was this tiny little backwater country. But by the time 586 comes along, Babylon takes over Assyria, and then Babylon's going to take Judah as well. And so this is why he's saying, okay, you're not going to believe me here, but I'm going to raise up Babylon. So it would be like me saying to you, 5 years from now, a superpower is going to overcome the United States militarily. Who would you guess it would be? You'd say, Russia, China. And I say, no, actually it's Puerto Rico. They're going to... And that's the feeling here. Babylon? Really? And God says, yeah, I'm going to raise them up to take care of the violence going on here, right? So his next question then is simply this. He says, God, why would you use wicked Babylon to punish Judah, right? Because he's really trying to, it's not so much an abstract question as it is he's trying to say, God, don't do this, right? So God, maybe you have overlooked this idea, but I'll tell you what, this is a bad idea because they're wicked and we're more righteous than they are, so let's just call the whole thing off, right? And he says it like this. O Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, we will not die, will we? O Lord, you have appointed them to execute judgment? You've appointed or ordained them to punish? This is a bad idea. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You can't tolerate wrong. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked Babylon swallow up those more righteous Judah than themselves? This is really a bad idea. I know you don't like evil in any form, so let's just leave them out of the picture and call the whole thing off. Right? And so God responds to him again, and the answer from God is, oh, point taken, Habakkuk, really good. So glad I got you to help me out, help me think through this kind of thing, because you're right, they are evil. So here's the deal. I will also punish Babylon for her sin eventually. But I will punish her for her sin eventually after they have destroyed Judah. Oh, it's not. No, And Habakkuk's just digging himself deeper and deeper in the hole here. And God comes along and talks about the condemnation and the woes that are going to come upon Babylon after they have destroyed Judah. So he's sitting here feeling like he's totally blocked in. Judgment is coming. And so then he just kind of bears it all. And he says, well, if you're persisting on bringing Babylon to destroy us, this really big superpower, we're obviously not going to survive. It brings up this question, are we finished as a nation? And this is his question in chapter 3. Are we finished? Is it over? Has the end come? Is everything we feared, is that going to happen? And I think I've done it to you guys in this class. I don't know if I have or not, but you guys always ask good questions, and sometimes someone will ask such a really deep, insightful question, I won't answer it. Have I done that to you this semester? Remember that? Someone will say, I have this question. I say, that is such a good question, not answering it. Which might sound counterintuitive, but because it's such an important question, I want you to answer it so that you will own the answer. I'm not just going to give it to you. I want you to dig for it so you own it, because that's a really important question. You need to know the answer. And I feel like that's kind of what God does with Habakkuk. And God looks at Habakkuk and says, are we finished as a nation? That is a really, really good question. In fact, it's so good, I'm not going to answer it. I want you to figure it out. Are you finished as a nation? And Habakkuk then gives the answer. Right? Notice the answer by Habakkuk. Don't miss this. In the class, don't miss this on the test. The answer by Habakkuk. It's really, really important that he ruminates on it. He meditates on Scripture. He thinks through and says, okay, are we finished as a nation? What are God's purposes? What is God's plan with us? Are we finished? And so watch his reasoning. It's just beautiful. Right? And as beautiful as it is, it's also kind of vague, especially when we start out. When you start out, you're not probably going to be able to follow his train of thought, but if you stay with it, it will dawn on you. So let's see how it starts out. His answer is this. Are we finished as a nation? His answer, God came from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran, Salah. Right? Like, what? Obviously, in his mind, he knows where Paran is and Teman is, and he thinks, oh man, this is such an impressive thought. I've got to sit back and pause and think about this, right? And we're looking at it thinking, I don't even know where those places are. How can I think about that? Well, keep going. His glory covered the heavens. His praise filled the earth. His splendor was like the sunrise. Rays flashed from his hand where his power was hidden. So God has this hidden power, and he let it go. So he's thinking about some time in the past when God has shown himself powerful, right? I think we can at least glean that. Plague went before him. Pestilence followed his steps, right? Now, I put these words in red because now he's starting to get specific enough that we can probably figure a few things out. Right? When has God demonstrated his power with plagues? Well, I can only think of 10 of them, right? Okay. Pestilence followed his steps. He stood and he shook the earth, and he certainly did, right? In the Exodus, he shook the earth. He certainly shook Egypt and the world's superpower at that time. The ancient mountains crumbled, and the age-old hills collapsed. Again, Old Testament poetic figure often for governments, right? The hills, the mountains, the ones that rule. And certainly Egypt, as a superpower government, political entity, was crumbled there. His ways are eternal. Were you angry with the rivers, O Lord? Was your wrath against the streams? Did you rage against the sea? Now let's think about this. When were there historical stories that we can think of where God's wrath raged against rivers, plural? What kind of rivers can you think of that God beat up on? Come on, not that hard. The first one is, it's surely on your minds because it's one of the 10 plagues. The first, plague. The Nile, right? He beat up on the Nile, turned it to blood. But what other river did he beat up on? Yeah, the Jordan River, he cut it in two, kind of, right? And 40 years later, he cut the Jordan River in two. And so Habakkuk is saying, were you angry with the rivers? Now, it's such an obvious rhetorical question that you might not even think it's important to answer, but it's a very important to answer. Did God look at the Nile and say, you bad Nile, right? Did he look at the Jordan River and say, oh, I'm going to punish you? And the answer is, of course, well, no. The reason why he beat up on those rivers, the Nile and Jordan, was to demonstrate his power in order to rescue his people, to take them out of Egypt and put them in the land, right? Did you rage against the sea when you rode with your horses and your victorious chariots? Obviously talking about the Red Sea, right? And of course, what he's doing is saying, this is your power to benefit your people. Sun and the moon stood still in the heavens, the glint of your flying arrows, the lighting of your flashing spear. Again, Joshua chapter 10, he does that. You came out to deliver your people, to save your anointed one. You crushed the leader of the land of wickedness, Pharaoh. You stripped him from head to foot by taking his firstborn son and his army and his elite chariot troops. Right? You trampled the sea with your horses, churning the great waters. So I think you can kind of see here what he's saying. God has in the past done all of this work, done all these miracles, done all this effort, humanly speaking, to rescue his people, to put them in the land. So are we finished as a nation? Well, God, you went to an awful lot of trouble just to stop now. So I heard and my heart pounded, my lips quivered at the sound, decay crept into my bones and my legs trembled. Yet I will wait patiently for the day of calamity to come on the nation invading us. So he kind of brings this whole thing together. We're almost at the end of the book here. He brings the whole thing together and says, oh, God, I realize the bad news is out there. It's coming. The nation invading us is going to come. You're not going to stop it. And decay creeps into my bones. I can feel it down in my deepest part, the sickness at the thought of this invasion. Yet, though the fig tree does not bud and there are no grapes in the vines, though the olive crop fails and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen and no cattle in the stalls. I mean, this is just some of the most beautiful poetry I can find in the Bible anywhere. There is absolutely no reason, circumstantially speaking, to look out at the situation and to be happy about it. Everything I see is bad, yet. Right? Because of faith, Habakkuk 2:4, the just shall live by faith. Because of that, I will rejoice in the Lord. I'll be joyful in God my Savior. How can you say that, Habakkuk? And Habakkuk simply says, because God has done so much work to bring us to this point here, he never would have invested all this work if he were going to give up now. I don't care how bad it looks. There is always hope because God is the one who started the work and he's the one who will complete it in us. Which is why he then says, the sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He enables me to go on the heights. So in Habakkuk's life, faith is the thing which enables him to do what anybody looking at him would look at and say, that's impossible. You can't possibly do that. You can't imagine that. You can't have confidence even in the light of everything bad. Habakkuk says, yeah, by faith I can do this because I trust the one who started the work. Right? Now, I just love these verses, not only because of the beauty of verses 17 and 18 and the ones before, but also because of 3:19, right? And I just want to say to you, this is not just this historical situation of Babylon coming to invade Israel. This is in a lot of ways a microcosm of what the Christian life is about. Habakkuk 2:4 is quoted by Paul, New Testament all over the place, because this is still and always will be the key to life, right? Of trusting in God and his goodness. Because tough times will come. They just will. We've studied Ecclesiastes. You know it in your head. If not in your heart, it will come. A number of years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, the night before I gave this lecture in the fall, my dad and I were at the nursing home with my mom. And we had taken her there in July, and this was close to November or December, and things were not going well at all. She wouldn't eat. She would hardly communicate with us, and we didn't know what to do. We would go over every night and comfort her and be with her and hold her hand, but we didn't really know. And that night, I will never forget as long as I live, one of the nurses came over to us and said, have you guys thought about hospice? It's like, oh my goodness, she just said that H word. Because my dad and I had both thought about this and worried about this and wondered about it, but because of what that word means, right? The kind of care that only comes when someone is going to imminently die. We didn't even want to say the word or to bring it up, lest we jinx ourselves or something, you just don't want to talk about that kind of thing. But when she came and said, have you guys thought about hospice? My response was, I've kind of thought about it, but I didn't know if we were there. Is that where we are? And she said, yeah. And it's like, oh man, it's just, if this has ever happened to you, this is one of those times when you realize there is no getting out of this one. This is only going to end one way, and it's really bad. So many other situations you have hope. Well, maybe there's this solution. Maybe we can sneak out of it this way, or maybe this quick cure or something, and you realize here, no, this Babylon's going to come, and there is no stopping it. Now what are you going to do? Right? Because those days come, and they will come, and you have to be ready, and you have to know, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go when that kind of thing happens to me? And Habakkuk says, though there are no figs on the vine, and there are no grapes on the vine, and though there are no cattle in the stalls, yet I will rejoice, because God wouldn't have brought us this far if He weren't going to take us all the way through. Like 2 years after that, similar call. We got, this is my niece, Hannah, who is a freshman at Liberty. And my sister-in-law called and said that Hannah was at Liberty with a bunch of her friends, and they wanted to go stargazing, and so they went out to a railroad trestle over the James River to watch stars. She had a couple of friends who were worship majors, and one was a Bible major, and they went out there to look at the stars. It's a beautiful, beautiful place to do it, but what they didn't realize is that when the train comes around the corner, you don't have enough time to get off the tracks. And so one of the girls jumped off and fell 50 feet to the ground and hurt herself really badly. A couple of guys jumped down and held on to the wooden parts while the train went over, but Hannah didn't make it. And so 5 kids, one of them dies, one of them's hurt, all 4 of them, those 4 survive. And my sister-in-law, Terry, knows, of course, her husband left her. Hannah is the bright spot of her life. Everybody knows that. And so she goes and she meets those 4 the next day for the first time. What's she going to say to her? What are they thinking, right? Because it was their idea to go out and to look at the stars. And they're thinking, this woman is going to come and be so angry. Didn't mean to, but we virtually killed her daughter. And she looks at them and she says, look, I understand how you might feel guilty about this, but I want you to know that Hannah had an appointment with God that night, and nothing was going to stop that. And I want you guys to realize that even though she is not here, what she would want for you is to serve God with all of your heart and to make your lives count, and then not let this hold you back, but to live for Him with joy and to tell everybody you can that there's coming a day when we're going to see her again and you want them to go with her and meet her. And that kind of life-freeing message, which is exactly right, which is absolutely true, but so unselfish and so supernatural, right? That's not the vengeance of a mother who's lost everything. That's the heart of a believer who has total faith in God and at the moment can minister grace to the people who desperately need it at that moment from the person they needed it from, right? How do you do that? How does that happen? Because the sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He enables me to go on the heights. Habakkuk is just giving us here a snapshot of how one lives by faith. When hard times come, there is nothing that can take away the life which God has started. Where are you going to go when the times happen? And I suggest Habakkuk is a pretty good answer. So let's leave Habakkuk there and let's get on to the very last little prophet to look at today, Obadiah. And I already told you guys about offering extra credit if you would name your firstborn child Obadiah, didn't I? Did I tell you that? I had one kid who did it, Joe Canobly. He said, if I can make his middle name Juan, I can call him Obi-Wan Canobly. I gave him extra credit. I don't know if he's really going to follow through or not, but I thought it was pretty fun. So here's the story of Obadiah, right? Now, the story of Obadiah, again, as I said to you beginning, it is not a new content. But what really makes it work is the timing. It's the timing when the message comes. So let me tell you a real quick story to help you get this, all right? Many, many years ago, I wanted to teach at Cedarville. And I wrote a letter to the department chair, and he said, well, if you want to teach at Cedarville, you have to have a doctoral degree. So I said, okay, that's it. Said to my wife, we're moving. We're going to go back to seminary and get a PhD. She said, okay. My wife has always been great about that stuff. We were thinking about being missionaries one time. She said, okay, let's go. Always ready to go with me. So we said, okay, we're going to go. So we lived in upstate New York, in Scroon Lake at the time. And I will distinctly remember, I was going to start in January, so this is late December, upstate New York, lots of snow, packed everything we have into a Ryder truck. And my buddy and I did most of the work during the day. It was about 9 o'clock at night. My wife was going to fly down a couple days later after we had driven the truck and the car down, all the way down to Dallas, Texas. And so we were young and stupid and full of adrenaline and said, oh man, the truck is all packed, let's just take off now. So we did, so we took off, and then about an hour down the road, the adrenaline wears off, and we're like, oh, I can't even keep my eyes open, right? So you pull over, but it's so cold you can't sleep. And again, I didn't think, how was this going to happen? So there's no place to sleep in the cab. I let my buddy have the bench, right, of the truck, and I sleep on the floor with the stick shift stuck in my belly, right? Not very comfortable. And then you're freezing, so after about 45 minutes, you're so cold, you see, the cold overcomes the sleep. Hey, let's turn the truck on and keep going. It's just a miserable night to doing that kind of thing, you know. And it's snowy and it's really bad, and you have to pass tests not only in Greek and Hebrew, but French and German. And I'd had some German in high school, and like most students, I should have studied beforehand, before the test, but I didn't. So I played these dumb mind games with myself, and I said, well, you know, I've got a 3-day drive down there. I'll just learn German in 3 days, right? So it doesn't work. Even if you knew it in high school, you can't refresh that fast, right? So I'm sitting there trying to look at the German, and the truck is bouncing, and I get a headache from doing that, and I'm thinking, man, I'm going to flunk this German test when I get there. My voice was shot. I could hardly talk to my buddy because I had a cold. And as soon as we got to Dallas, it was nice, bright, sunny skies, as Dallas almost always is, and I jumped out, and I landed on a patch of ice and fell down and busted my elbow. Oh, wait, there's not supposed to be ice down here. But there was, right? And then we went into the apartment complex where we were going to stay, and on the hillside going in, there were a couple little kids out there. And I thought, oh, this is fun. You know, my 3-year-old can play with them. And I realized they had another kid down on the ground, and they were beating the tar out of the little kid. And I'm like, oh, no. We walk into the apartment, and the landlord flips on the lights, and all these roaches scat. So I said, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm not going to stay here. I only knew one guy in Dallas, and he said, well, you can come stay at our house. It's not big enough for you, but you can stay in the garage. So I did. My buddy Dave flew back. My wife flew down, and here I am in the garage with my wife and 2 little kids, a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I have no place to put my stuff or to go, and I'm going to flunk the German exam, and I'm saying to my wife, let's just get in the truck and drive back to New York, okay? And she said, no, I'm feeling like the biggest loser ever. She said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to stay right here. I said, why? And this is going to sound really cheesy, okay? But you bear with me, okay? I said, why? She said, because you can do this. And I thought, okay, I love this girl, but her biggest failing is too much confidence in my abilities, right? And I said, I don't think I can do this. She said, yes, you can do this. And again, this sounds really corny. She said, and I love you. Now, she says it to me all the time, right? But the thing is, at that point, it was like, I said to her, are you sure? Because I felt so unlovely. I felt like the biggest loser, husband, dad. I just like, oh, are you sure you love me now? And she said, yes, I do, and you can do this. And God was speaking through her because we did find a place to stay and spent 2 years there, and some of the best 2 years foundational for ministry of our lives. Just really, really loved it. But I will, till the day I die, will never forget her saying she loved me, because at that point I felt so unlovable, and I could do it. Now, if you understand the timing of why that common message is so important, you'll understand Obadiah. All right? So let me show you the background of Obadiah, and here's what's happening. 586 BC. Jerusalem has been holocausted. I used to think Holocaust was a name just for Germany, just for Israel during Germany, but it's not. It's the Jewish people use it for even 586 because it's so similar in a lot of ways. It's a total, horrible, dehumanizing destruction. A few people survive that siege, and a few people flee, and they get down here, and as soon as they do, the Edomites come out and take advantage of them. It's like, oh, come on. Adding insult to injury. You just escaped the Babylonians. Do the Edomites have to pile on at this moment? And so Obadiah comes along with a little prophecy against the Edomites for what they've done to Israel right here. Now, I don't know if that makes any sense to you, right? Any other time in history, you would think, okay, sure, God's going to beat up on the people, beat up on Israel. But this is the point where Israel feels like, okay, 586, the Mosaic covenant is broken. The curse has come upon us. Has God given up on us? And when God says, no, I'm going to get those people who got you, that demonstrates he's still jealous for Israel. And that's why when he says, I love you in the book of Obadiah, it's such a comforting moment because Israel, at this point, I guarantee you, looks back and says, are you sure? And God says, yes. So here's how he does it in this book. God says to Edom, your warriors, O Edom, will be terrified, and everyone in Esau's mountains will be cut down by the slaughter. Because of the violence against your brother Jacob, you'll be covered with shame, you'll be destroyed forever. On the day you stood aloof while strangers carried off his wealth and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were like one of them. You should not march through the gates of my people in the day of their disaster, nor look down on them in the calamity in the day of their disaster, nor seize their wealth in the day of their disaster. You should not wait at the crossroads to cut down their fugitives, nor hand over their survivors in the day of their trouble. So I just want to say, just in case you haven't read through the book of Obadiah already, you just did, basically. Right? That's about all there is to this little book. The day of the Lord is near. Again, there's the phrase again from Joel, for all nations. As you've done, it'll be done to you. Your deeds will return upon your own head. Now, that's the phrase I want to camp out on here for a second. Right? I hope this looks really, really familiar. If you had to find a promise of God somewhere that sounded like that, or this was a paraphrase of that promise, where would you go? You got to realize this is Genesis 12, isn't it? I'm going to bless those who bless you, and I'm going to curse those who curse you. As they have done, it'll be done to you. Your deeds will return upon your own head, Edom. So let's put this whole thing in theological perspective then. Where are we at this moment in history? In 586, Jerusalem's destroyed, the exile has occurred, and Deuteronomy 28 and verse 68 has now been fulfilled. And as an Israelite, you're saying, oh gosh, God, are we done? Is it over? Is the covenant broken? Do we have a special covenant relationship with you? And what you realize from Obadiah is this, okay, this two-sided conditional covenant of the Mosaic law, it's broken. Is everything gone? And the answer is no, because there's still Genesis 12. There's still this one-sided unconditional covenant where God says, I will bless you. I will make you into a nation. I will send a Redeemer who will come and put all the world back together. And just to say it very clearly, I'm still cursing those who curse you, because even though the Mosaic covenant may be broken, the promises to Abraham will never be forgotten. Do you love me? Yes, I still do. So I look at Obadiah, and you see the message of Obadiah, you see the timing of Obadiah, and what I really want you to see Obadiah is this. I want you to see Genesis 12 kind of stamped all over it, okay? Because that's the message that Obadiah is bringing out at this particular time, which makes it so unique and so special, and why God says, yeah, we need that book. We need that one little chapter that needs to stay in Revelation forever.